Everybody, this is the Queen of Missiles. I'm here to kind of show off what is coming in the 6.4.0 release. It's not a huge amount of content, but some of the stuff in here is kind of neat depending on what you're going to be doing with ICBM as a mod. So some of the boring stuff is we've got some more subtitles, we got a couple more translations, small fixes, adjustments. For example, one of the fixes that's kind of hilarious is thermobaric was using the same exact code as the nuke. So for those of you who have had that fun experience of dropping a thermobaric and getting free radioactive blocks and kind of like making a mess of everything, that's now been fixed, although it was enjoyable while it lasted. Other small fixes have really just been things like kind of hitting entities with missiles and causing them to invalidate position. This was kind of happening rarely, but was basically more of a vanilla bug than something we were doing. Basically, if two entities occupy the same space, when they do knockback effect, you can cause one entity to pretty much go into an invalid number range and cease to exist, more or less, because it would send it off the map, which is fun to reproduce, bad if you're in a PvP situation, and it basically is a free kill. Other things, some recipe decrafting, which I can show off really quick because I'm going to do some of the more entertaining things last. So for those of you that have been playing around with stuff like the balloons and everything else, you can now decraft the payloads on them. So if I come over here, say grab pretty much any block, doesn't really matter what block, what item, you can pretty much craft them. You can get the item, which will have whatever you have in it, and you can now decraft it, pull it back out. The balloon will stay in the grid. The same exact thing works for the parachute and also works for one of the items I'll be showing off here later, which is the item holder missile. Cluster does not currently have a decrafting for this. I will probably add one later if I haven't already and just forgot about it. Mostly for the reason that the cluster can have n number of items in it, and those items could be literally anything you want them to be. They don't even have to be the same item. You could literally do dirt, cobble, arrows, an explosive, whatever. You can have a ton of fun with clusters. So that gets that out of the way. We've now got a recipe for a smoke missile. So marking smoke, I have no idea why I forgot to add one for this. This is really just an admin utility or dev utility item, but for those of you who want to test your missile setups, this is still a pretty useful item because you're effectively just can take something relatively cheap, which in this case we're using repulsive. Now this is supposed to be a larger multiple, so I have to go check why that isn't the case. You're supposed to get like a ton of these back out, not just the one. But repulsives aren't super expensive. Pretty much if you have any type of gunpowder farm or witch farm, you pretty much can farm explosives for like no cost, more or less, depending on what setups you've got. So that has no recipe now. We now have audio effects for radioactive blocks, which I'll be showing off here in a bit when I talk about kind of how radioactive blocks have been changed. What else do we got in here? Condensed explosives now have vanilla large and huge explosion particles. I can show that off really quick. So the reason for this change and the reason why it wasn't a thing originally is when this was kind of implemented. Way back in the day, we did actually have the large and huge explosive effects particles on here. And then I forget which update it was. We just kind of removed it and never remembered to stick it back. And it kind of had to do with, I think, some server symbolization. But you saw how we got the kind of like crescent moon type things. Those are parts of the large part. So now, honestly, this doesn't make a huge difference for most people. The reason for introducing it is just resource pack makers now have the ability to hook on that and change the way it looks to get much more beautiful small explosions, especially for hitting like multiple targets with missiles and stuff. I'll be looking at doing some more particle effects through some of the bigger explosives down the road. We, in the past, have had some. They just stopped working various versions and just really hasn't been a priority to update because most people are looking for the functionality, not the aesthetic. Although it kind of could be sad with the nuke. The nuke used to have a really good mushroom cloud, and that code is still somewhat there, but due to Minecraft's distance particle settings and a few other things, doesn't work the way it does. It needs to kind of be done via a shader now to get the right effects, unless you want to cheap out and do a 3D model like a few other mods. Like I think Trinity does that, and it doesn't look as good as it could. So what else we got here? Cruise Launcher has some more status effects changes coming up in the release. I'm not going to show these off. They're no big deal. It's just kind of telling you what it already was doing. So if you don't have a missile in there, it'll now inform you properly. If you're out of energy, it'll inform you properly. Before it was just saying unknown error, please check or something, or status or safety error. And then I think that covers a lot of the basic stuff. So now we get to some of the more interesting things. I'm going to show off first the nukes, and then I'm going to get into the item holder missile. So for the nuke changes, for those who didn't see in previous updates, we added a radioactive block as kind of a short-term solution for the fact the atomic science mod isn't quite there with its fallout mechanic. So for this, when you go and set off a nuke, it will actually place, and let me actually go find You think the nuke missile would show up when you search for it, but I think it's actually nuclear. Yeah, there it is. I should see if I can add an alias to that. That'd be so awesome. So I get that. Get the direct launcher, and let's go find a pretty spot. That's surprising, actually, over here. Nice spot. Sorry, piggies. Slight lag spike there because it's recording on a laptop plus doing this at the same time is probably not my best choice of the day. But when these do impact, they do add radioactive blocks on the ground. We have two different radioactive blocks that have been in the previous versions. We have a soil one and we have a snow one. They kind of place as little too many radioactive blocks. This is something I'm going to look at balancing so that way you don't have as many and it's not going to be as harsh on your block tick rates and performance-wise. But it is meant to be a short stopgap due to the fact that we don't have that fallout mechanic, because ideally what I want this nuke to do is to be placing radioactive material on top of the blocks or embedding themselves into the blocks without actually replacing the blocks. This way we can handle a far larger range of block types and not have to worry about adding custom blocks that, I'll be honest, don't look the best and don't have a lot of variety to them, although we can fix that part with some textures later. That's not a big deal. But in this case, when the blocks are placed, some of the changes that have happened, we now have configurable values for everything. So there is configs to change how often these blocks are going to tick. Previously, these were also running into random ticks. So random tick basically worked is pretty much every tick, it was going to tick 3 blocks per 16 by 16 by 16 cubic chunk, more or less. So for those who don't know how Minecraft chunk system works, chunks are divided into 16 by 16 in terms of X and Z, and then Y is going to be 0 to 256. Well, inside that 256 range, it also is subdividing again into 16 layers, and these are called 16 block layers. It calls them extended block storage in the code, pretty much. But it's a cubic chunk system. And part of the cubic chunk system, every time the server is ticking, it is going through asking, hey, does this chunk need randomly ticked? If it does need randomly ticked, which is based on the blocks that are inside the chunk, it's then going to go through and pick 3 of those based on some incremental value. I'm not 100% sure if that means it's doing it linearly, if it's doing diagonally, but it doesn't mean that those blocks will eventually get ticks. That's how it was behaving previously. The new version, we kind of replaced this with a scheduled update tick system. So now you're going to get a more consistent every 5 tick trigger. So every 5 ticks, which is about a quarter of a second, because there's 20 ticks per second as long as your server is running at optimal speed. So you're going to get every 5 ticks, it's going to trigger a radioactive decay. And then per entity caught in the radius, it's going to attempt to apply radioactive damage, which it's going to check for armor. All armors have a configurable option to protect you, not just built-in armors to various mods. So there's a config in there. It's mod pack makers, server owners. You guys can all adjust that. You can have fun with it. You can even add leather armor, iron armor, so on to those config values. By default, we support atomic science. And then I could probably by default add more types if people want to go look up the list of armors for me and send those to me in Discord. So that every time you install the mod, you don't have to worry about going to the config file and supporting your favorite mods that have various armors and various effects. We can't do a lot of fancy MBT checks or API checks at the moment on that. That's something that might happen when we eventually get this mod to newer versions. I might go through the effort of downloading and implementing a whole bunch of APIs from other popular mods. But that gets through the configs what we have. So one of the other things that was introduced is we now have radioactive half-life decay. Now this is kind of more there for certain server owners who want the radioactive blocks to go away eventually. By default, this is set to at 1,000th of a percent, which means it's going to take weeks for these blocks to go away in loaded chunks, and if the chunk unloads, you're on your own. It's going to stay there forever. That's pretty much done at the same rate, so you can adjust that delay. Every time that delay kicks off, it's going to run that check, and it's going to see if the blocks go away. We did a lot of testing for this. Our initial versions took about a day, so we ended up upgrading the values and toying around with those. If you want radioactive blocks to go away quickly, set it to about 1%, and you'll see them go away in about an hour or so. It's really fast. Actually, I think at 1% it's 18 minutes. I think at like 100th of a percent, or no, 10th of a percent, it's a good hour or so, or a couple hours. You can toy with the values. I am planning on building a simulation tool and possibly putting it somewhere on a website so you all can mess with that. There's no ETM when I'll get that done, as I hope to have worked on it today, and that did not happen as I had other plans to do, and that's just how my entire life goes, which is why releases are entirely slow. But this gets through the radioactive blocks and gets through a lot of that. You also can mess with the wither effect, change its duration. If you set to 0, it will turn off. You can also turn the radioactive decay off by setting its chance to 0, and same with a lot of the other effects. You can just mess with the configs, have fun. Now moving into the item holder missile, which is something I'm actually kind of enjoying. So for those who aren't been in the Discord, the whole entire idea behind item holder missile was to play on the meme of sword missiles. So let me go ahead and grab one of the item holder missiles. Let's go grab a sword. And I am going to need a crafting table because that's just not something that you get a crafting grid in creative. It's kind of annoying. I really should fix that. There's probably a couple mods that does it. Wait, I don't want that piece. I want the missile and this. Now, depending on how you craft this is how this missile is going to behave. I do need to still come back in and improve the crafting a little bit, as there's actually 4 different modes this missile can be in. When you craft it to the right of the missile, it's going to activate the right-click behavior of an item. So same right-click you have for secondary action if you invert your controls. If you collect it to the left, it will be the primary action. For swords, you're going to want the primary action. Later on, when I get the more crafting mode, I'll be able to set it up for using primary first, then secondary, so depending on what items you're using, it'll improve or change that behavior. And then we'll do other things. So the reason you probably want to do primary and then secondary on certain things, shears work on primary for breaking blocks, secondary for sharing entities. So keep that in mind when you're using this. You're going to have to experiment with it. I recommend experimenting in creative mode and having a lot of fun with what you can do with these. It does support all items, but it does have very limited ability for interactions. This means it'll do left clicks, it'll do right clicks, it'll do some block placements. If anything needs certain behavior like shift right clicks, alt right clicks, left clicks, various behaviors on hold or stuff like that, the missile does not support that. And I probably will not add those features. I do not want this missile to kind of exist as a substitute for player interaction. And the kind of the reason for that is if we start going in that direction, we're probably going to end up making another missile that has more complex behavior or may deploy something that actually does those things. For the moment, I want to keep it simple because the joke was meant to be, I can have a sword missile. So you can have this, you can pretty much fire it, and it will do the exact damage and effects a sword does. So we did write the code to pull from the enchantment table to attempt to replicate as much behavior as it can. It is limited because it does use a fake player. Fake players, for those who aren't familiar with, a lot of server owners and stuff, don't replicate everything a player can do. There is a possibility that some items may even crash, so keep an eye out for that. If you see crashes, there is a config you can disable certain items from running, and it will inform the user that that item is config disabled. And for those who have never seen the configs, mod options, come down here, config, and you can find pretty much everything in here you want to look for. I still need to get some translations in here, but for example, if I want to mess with missiles, held item ban allow list, you can add whatever you want to this. So for example, if you want to disallow, say, sticks, you just Minecraft stick, click done. You can update this in real time in single player. Multiplayer servers, I don't know if there are mods that resynchronize, but if I come back over here, grab that held item, grab a stick, that will block usage. This same exact logic works for balloons, parachutes, and clusters. They all have very similar configs for this behavior. And if that item had previously been crafted, it will show up as a red text inside of the description, because one of the things I have implemented for all these is they will now show the full tooltip of the item you're holding. So if there was enchantments on the sword, it will tell me all the enchantments. If this sword was damaged, it'll tell me it's damaged. If it has various effects going on, it'll tell me what's going on with those. But let's go find something to go shoot at so I can kind of show that this does do damage. And we might have to look for a second or two. Ah, there's a sheep. Now, you do have to keep in mind, Minecraft entities have a weird collision box. If you want to see what those collision boxes look like, F3B, and you have to hit the collision box. Or latency is fun when you have it when you're trying to record. So we're seeing like really low movement speed there for that. That is not a bug with the code. That is just my CPU is dying. But that gets that functionality there. We have some more features coming up that I'm going to try to get implemented. For those who have not seen, we do have a code deck that we link in the Discord. It does show all the upcoming work that is being done. For 1.12, there's a deck specifically for that that shows all of the long-time support features that are being implemented, as we are still on the way to updating to newer versions, but it's going to take some time, as time is very limited. But I'll see you all next time, and feel free to join the Discord to keep up on updates and interact any way you want.